We just got some pretty interesting news and updates around Fallout 76. We're on the cusp on several actually pretty big new additions coming to the game, and some of which we'll get to play this week. Even further, there was a recent interview with the project lead on Fallout 76, and in this we get quite a few details about what's coming for this game's future. Somewhat of a description as to what we can expect with the Brotherhood of Steel and their arrival, but even further, some of their plans for year 2, and certain features that are going to be getting quite a bit more attention. If you guys enjoy the content or just want to stay up to date with Fallout 76, you can get subscribed. As you'll hear very shortly, there's going to be a lot of news coming out this week, but first and foremost, let's start off with that. As in Bethesda's most recent Inside the Vault article, they described how a new public test server update is coming to Fallout 76 at some point this week. There's no explicit date or time, but I would have to imagine in the next couple of days. But what's interesting is what's coming in this, as they also mentioned that the camp shelters feature will be live as the public test server does return. And down the line, they'll be adding the Steel Dawn quest content. They say here how they're going to add it in the coming weeks after the PTS goes live again. So this is pretty exciting and pretty big. In many interviews, Bethesda has almost described camp shelters as their solution for camp building in Fallout 76. The camp budget hasn't really gotten that much builder, but there's been a constant flow of both free and paid items that you could place down at your camp, which inevitably is going to be a problem. So camp shelters will basically function as this little door you could place down in your camp. Shelters are described as coming in varying sizes, layouts, and styles. And on the public test server, they're going to playtest 3 different types. The wording on this is a little interesting. They say varying sizes, layouts, styles. Does that mean there'll be a variety of different options, but we're only getting to test 3 on the public test server? Or is there only going to be 3 in this update, or perhaps 3 now and then more get added later? But otherwise, it seems pretty simple. You place down a door at your camp, and this will be the entrance to your shelter. And then from there, once you go in, it'll be an instanced underground location with a separate build budget compared to the rest of your camp. As far as how big these will be, or perhaps even the themes of them, we did see a vault picture on the recent community roadmap, so it's suspected this will be one of the camp shelter options, and if it is a vault, that would be pretty sizable. And we know that building rules will be lessened in the shelter, so be able to place things more freely, intersect objects more often, and overall seemingly have more custom builds. And another pretty cool aspect of this to actually test breaking these on the public test server is there'll be no material requirement for building, so you could build freely and for free to hopefully actually try and create laggy structures and have Bethesda better optimize things. Although one question I do have is whether or not Atomic Shop items will be allowed. In the past, Atomic Shop unlocks were not allowed on the public test server, and that's kind of a big aspect of building in this game. You are quite a bit more limited if you don't have any of those purchases, but either way, this definitely seems like it's going to be a great and big new addition. Hopefully this comes out in the next couple of days and I'll have some first impressions playing it for myself. But separately, they also again mention how Steel Dawn quest content is coming to the public test server. Again, simply described as coming in the next weeks. They also mention how some of the NPCs from this will have robo voice, so likely the voice acting isn't done or isn't totally implemented, and that's leading to this. And it seems like this may only be the questing side of Steel Dawn. It seems like the overall DLC will contain quests, companions, or at least one companion, new weapons, and armors. But seemingly here, we're only getting some of those quests, as that's all that was mentioned in this article. This is a pretty interesting one to me because it's going to make a weird situation where those who have the public test server on Bethesda.net, and you could only get it on Bethesda.net copies of Fallout 76 right now, will just be able to play the new content. Of course, it's on the public test server. I'm sure there's a decent chunk who will wait for the full reveal, but I'm also sure there's a decent chunk who will just play it now because obviously people want to get to it ASAP. And I know I, for one, will play the new content and talk about it in videos, so it'll be interesting from a spoiler perspective. I'll always give spoiler warnings and not ruin anything for anybody, but I find it interesting how Bethesda is continuing with the public test server in this regard for questing content. I honestly suspected that the NDA would return when it came to this type of content to kind of keep it out of the public eye so much. Also, another interesting observation around all of this is it definitely seems like the public test server is going to be up for a while. Technically, both Shelters as well as Steel Dawn are coming in the winter update, but we have one other one before that, coming on October 13th. We'll likely know what's to come with that smaller update, or what seems like it'll be a smaller update, but then the much larger end of year update. Bethesda also announced that tomorrow we're getting a new hotfix for Fallout 76, and this is meant to address some of the balancing issues with One Wasteland. Although reportedly a couple of bug fixes are also coming with this, Bethesda basically described how they're going to smooth out difficulty jumps, in particular for mid-game players when it comes to One Wasteland. That basically meaning that things got very difficult very quickly as you hit level 20 to 30 or so. There's been a lot of people complaining about the higher level creatures, like being a level 200 and having level 100 mole rats come and raid your base, but based on everything Bethesda said thus far, it doesn't seem seem like this hotfix is really affecting high-level players. It again is for more of those sub-level 50 players, or at least that's how it was described. But then let's take a look at this pretty big and lengthy interview Jeff Gardner, the project lead on Fallout 76, just gave around the future of the game and even quite a few insights into its development. And starting things off, let's talk about what he describes for this winter patch, the one adding in both Steel Dawn as well as these Fallout shelters. We don't have an exact release date, but he does mention how it's the last one of the year and adding the Brotherhood of Steel, and that's an important line that we'll come back to. Another new thing coming with this patch is the change to the survival system, so no longer in Fallout 76 will you get penalties for being hungry or thirsty, but rather if you do maintain your hunger or thirst, you'll get buffs to your character. Going to be a nice change, so you could kind of neglect these if you want, but perhaps before going into a fight, you could actually eat or drink a bunch to improve some kind of stat or whatever it's going to give you. As far as the Brotherhood of Steel DLC, here they mention new quests, some allies, lots of weapons, armors, and even some random encounters coming with it. Overall, it's not going to be as big as Wastelanders, and it's not one big update. And here he describes how it's going to be spread out over several months, unlike Wastelanders. And this aspect has been kind of confusing to me because Steel Dawn has consistently been described as just the Steel Dawn Brotherhood of Steel update. But here again, we've heard how the update will be spread out, which has been somewhat mentioned in interviews over the summer. But we don't really know what that means. We heard how Bethesda combined both Steel Dawn and Fractured Steel. There's supposed to be two separate updates bringing the Brotherhood of Steel, but now they're just making it one big one with Steel Dawn, which seems to be, from a story perspective, kind of the continuation. Steel Dawn would have had its own questline, Fractured Steel would have been the continuation of that, but instead now it's all coming at once. But then also apparently there's going to be subsequent updates with this Brotherhood of Steel DLC. So does that mean that Steel Dawn, now being the combined Steel Dawn and Fractured Steel, is part 1 and then there'll be kind of a part 2 down the road? Or rather, is it that Steel Dawn isn't actually one update? Like the quests, new weapons, new allies, new armors, those will just kind of be spread out over a couple of weeks or even a couple of months as Bethesda works on some of that content. It is somewhat confusing. They talk about Steel Dawn as almost a singular thing, but perhaps the Steel Dawn umbrella of content is actually coming out over a couple of months, which could have an interesting impact if some of those quests kind of don't finish. Like if hypothetically you could get 3-4 quests in, but then if you want to do the last 10, you're going to have to wait a couple of months as those get implemented. That of course is all speculation as to what this exactly means, but again, it is pretty interesting. He also mentions a Halloween event, that some kind of event is being put up for Halloween. This is also kind of confusing. Following this roadmap coming out and no Halloween event being added, people started asking about this, and the community managers did clarify the Mischief Night, aka last year's Halloween event, would not return because it was kind of buggy and had other problems. But then we hear in this interview that there's going to be something. The Bombs Drop event is right around there, but maybe there's some kind of surprise or smaller Halloween event of some kind getting added in. It's also described during this interview though that a Christmas event is something they're considering, and it seems like this is separate from the Holiday Scorched event. He does confirm here that they will be adding additional mutations to daily ops in the game, a couple of things they're going to be improving on or expanding on in next year. Apparently New Game Plus is something they actually really care about. Right now in Fallout 76, if you unlock legendary perks on one character, it'll apply to all characters on that account, thus making it a bit easier, or you could actually get some of the benefits of certain perks on a totally new level 1 character. And here it's described how this is something they plan to continue to build on in the future. This legendary perk implementation is just the first step. And 2022 was actually described as being crazier in general, with additional content, gameplay systems, and even balance tweaks on the way. The whole year of 2021 is already scheduled internally, and it's something they describe as being excited to share. Camp shelters are just the first step in improving the building functionality of Fallout 76, and this is something else they are focusing on. He doesn't get into specifics as to how that's going to work or where it'll be improved outside of shelters, but that definitely is exciting for builders out there. And even for the PvP folk, they're looking at ways to address PvP down the line next year, so in the latter half of 2021. And he does mention here how he recognizes that survival mode has an audience, and many of those players still play the game. There is still a player base that likes things like that. So perhaps some kind of new game mode could be implemented to appeal to the more PvP focused players, although they don't really mention how exactly they're going to address the PvP desire for Fallout 76 fans. Then they also go into some of the development of Fallout 76, which is a pretty interesting insight into the background of this game. Reportedly, the game design overall took 3 years in total, and actually how Jeff Gardner himself, the project lead, is in Rockville, while the main team on Fallout 76 is in Austin. And it's been like that since day one, so he has always kind of been separated from the core team. A large portion of the current staff is the live team, who is addressing bugs and exploits, and reportedly the content team is somewhat separate, and also there are multiple multiple different branches of the game. So he describes here, on a daily basis, he is downloading several branches, and sometimes some features are live in one branch but not in another. One example he gives is one Wasteland. Seemingly that was live in one branch at a certain time, but then not in other branches. I think this definitely could be a source of some issues we've had with bugs or the re-implementation of bugs with Fallout 76. He describes here how 8 content patches is their goal for a year, and then there's some smaller ones in between. Apparently Todd Howard vets all of the incoming ideas for this game. They make a list of things they hope to add and then show it to Todd Howard, and he gives opinions or get a green light for him before they go forward with it, which is pretty interesting. Assuming that is totally true, I think a lot of people probably would have assumed Todd Howard's far more removed on Fallout 76 and not really active in its development, but seemingly no, he actually does keep up to date with everything that is getting added. As far as next-gen consoles, there are no plans to actually go to that, at least right now. They're not actively pursuing it, but is something that is actively discussed both externally and internally, and he gives a similar response with cross-play and cross-saves. It is something that would have a huge opportunity cost. It's a low priority for them and require a ton of work to get functioning. They do a retrospective on their patches and now also on their marketing campaigns, so they could look back and see what they could do better. Some of the issues with the game are not really something they could address. They actually name Amazon Web Services here as they host these servers, so at points there's been problems with that and just kind of out of their control to a degree, but overall they are very happy with how the game has progressed this year, and they thank many of the fans who gave them a second chance. So overall it was a pretty informative one. I'll have a link to the full interview down below. There's a lot of interesting insights from it, and it is just nice to hear from developers. The Inside the Vaults are good, and it's definitely better to have them than not, but hearing from the developers I think is a lot more informative. As always, again, I thank you all for watching this one. Hopefully you found it informative. This week we should hear a lot more around Fallout 76 and its future, checking out vault shelters themselves, but also data mines that are invariably going to come from the public test server, and even just the hotfix coming tomorrow. But with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.